talking about unpacking tax credits, and we're going to be focusing primarily here in Canada tax credits and in our province, BC. I'm Mandeep, I'm the board chair of iSAFF, and I'm also the VP of Finance at Lark Productions. What's my role there? I do corporate financing, and I also manage a lot of our production budgets, including tax credits. And this is Robert Wong joining us from Creative BC. I'll let Bob do a quick intro.
Thanks, Mandeep. Hi, everyone. My name is Bob Wong. I am the Vice President at Creative BC. I oversee all the administration of the tax credit programs as well as the administration of all the other funding programs, which we will not be covering today.
Thank you. So, just a quick highlight. We're just going to talk high-level tax credits, just to give you an overview, so you kind of know how it works, the eligibility requirements. We're not going to go into too many details. We'll share some examples. Otherwise, we'd be here for hours or weeks talking tax credits, and we'll lose you.
But I'd love to spend weeks talking about it. So just a quick overview of Creative BC. We are a government economic development agency set up to support the creative industries. And for us, the creative industries include motion pictures, so film and TV, animation, visual effects. But it also includes book and magazine publishing, interactive digital media, and music. And so how we support these industries is really provide funding programs and the administration of the motion picture tax credit program. So a lot of times you hear about tax credits, so this is an unpacking the tax credits session. What are tax credits? And they're sometimes a little bit of a mystery. So what they are refundable incentives. So in other words, they are actually cash back to the eligible production company for doing eligible projects in British Columbia. The tax credits in BC are based solely on what we call BC labor expenditures. So amounts that you pay for BC people to work on your productions, you essentially get a rebate back from the provincial government for those wages and salaries. Lessens your cost of production there. There is no production cap, so in other words, your production can be as small or as big as you want it to be, and there is no cap on that those tax credits. Also, there is no corporate tax credit tax caps. In other words, if you have a company and you're doing multiple productions, you could do one production, you could do 4 productions a year. If they all qualify, you can get tax credits for all of those projects that happen there. Finally, the province has no annual cap. So in some jurisdictions, you say there's only X amount of dollars that are available a year. In British Columbia, there are not. So for the last fiscal year, the year ending March of 2025, the province gave out close to $900 million worth of tax credits in the motion picture sector. So it's a fairly robust program there. And finally, there is no sunset date on this program. So it is in legislation, but there is no end date to this program.
So I'll just share some examples. We'll just share some quick examples of what Bob just went through. So that means that you can have a production here in BC. Your production budget could be $1 million, could be $60 million. There's no cap on it. All you have to meet is certain requirements. What is eligible labor? And then there's other requirements as well, but there's no caps on limit, so it's up to you of what that amount of budget is.
Correct. So if you spend the money and the project and the production company are eligible, you get these incentives from the provincial government. So what we have in British Columbia is 2 programs under the tax credit program, as you can see here. To your right is the Production Services Tax Credit Program. That is really for those foreign US productions that are coming up here, that are hiring BC people, using our facilities, using our locations there. But they're done by companies that are not necessarily Canadian-controlled BC companies. The program to your left, the Film Incentive BC program, is what we're going to focus on here. And these are some of the requirements under both programs that we list. I won't go through all of them there, but what we'll do is we'll go through some of the highlights under the Film Incentive BC program.
Yeah, so the first one that's the main requirement is that you have to have a Canadian-controlled corporation in BC. So that means it has to be a Canadian control, so the director or the officer of that company has to be Canadian. So that's really important. One of the other things I want to point out is the Canadian content. So we're not going to go into too much details here, but to be eligible, 6 out of 10 points has to be for your Canadian key creatives. So that means any of your key talent, your key writers, or your writers, your showrunners, they kind of have to be Canadian, but that doesn't mean you can't use foreign talent, right? That doesn't mean you can't use outside of Canada talent, but there has to be, there are restrictions in place that the key creatives has to be, you have to meet 6 out of 10. Other,
Did you want to mention about the actual creative content of the Canadian content, what it means and it doesn't mean? It doesn't have to be a true, quote,
yes.
Canadian story?
So we're going to, touch base on that. So your creative piece doesn't have to be a Canadian story. So it could be a foreign story. It doesn't have to be Canadian because, you know, in BC, we're full of culture, we're full of diversity. It could be any topic you want to discuss. It could be a documentary, it could be a reality, it could be a scripted series, it could be a short film, it could be anything that you want. And it doesn't have to be Canadian. You just have to meet the requirements that are what require in order for you to be eligible for the tax credits.
And it doesn't have to be in English or French language either. So
yeah.
It can be in any language as long as, again, you meet all of these requirements.
And I think another key point would be that, you know, a lot of us are doing multicultural or filmmakers that are in Punjabi or Hindi in a different language, that you just need a distributor. So that doesn't mean that, Bob can correct me on this, that doesn't mean that it has to be, that you have to have a Canadian broadcaster attached to it or a streamer attached to it. As long as you have someone you have a distribution agreement to it, they can go exploit that internationally. So there where you've met, so it's like a three-way connection as opposed to you're the producer and you're making a connection with a broadcaster or a streamer. You can go a three-way, which is having a distribution agreement, and that distributor now has taken the rights. So you've met that Canadian check mark, but now your distributor is going to go exploit it to whatever international country they want.
Yeah, and that's correct. So, I mean, you definitely would want to have a Canadian broadcaster or streamer if you can, because that would be a great source of financing, but it's not necessary in order to make it work under this program there. We'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, next slide.
So very quickly, I said that all the tax credits in British Columbia are based on labor expenditures. What you see here is under the production services tax credit. So I just wanted to show you so you see it. But this is again for the program that supports international US productions that are filming here. These are the rates that you get. So depending on what you're doing, that's the percentage of the labor expenditure that you pay that you would get. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I'm going to show you the second slide if you want to go to the next slide. This is the Film Incentive BC program. This is the program that we're talking about where Canadian producers are making stories and making their projects here in BC. You can see the rates that we've got here. These rates are new, effective January 1st of this year. So if you start a project on January 1st or later this year, these are the new rates. The province increased them to 40%. So that 40% means that for every $100 that you pay an actor, a Canadian actor, or a director, or somebody who's working on your lighting there, you would get $40 back from the provincial government. The bonuses that we talk about there are stackable on top of that 40%. So if you're filming in Langley, for example, you would get another 12.5 points on top of that 40. So you're looking at $52.50 of every $100 that you're working on if you were making a project like this. I'll go through some of the other ones in a little bit more detail in further slides, but I wonder if Mandeep wanted to jump in.
Yeah, so I can give some examples on this. So when you start, as a filmmaker, as a producer, you're working on your production budget, these are some of the elements that you want to keep in mind. So as you're working through, like, you know, what's your talent, who are your key writers, your head of departments, your camera, electrical, what is, you want to think about, are they BC? Are they a BC resident? Are they a Canadian resident? Because that's where you'll meet the eligibility requirements of, like, how much labor. So maybe I want to say this tax program incentive is available because as a producer or filmmaker, you're creating jobs. You're creating jobs within BC or within Canada. So the government's saying you're creating jobs and opportunities for people. So we're going to give you the tax credit back on that labor, right? So let's say you've hired your key writer. You're going to get 40% back in tax credits on whatever you paid that individual.
And I think, Mandy, you bring up a really great point. This program is to create jobs in British Columbia. So it's not, we don't look at each application and vet whether or not the creatives meet some kind of standard. So your story is really almost irrelevant to the tax credits. If you meet all the eligibility criteria, the tax credits, you can get these tax credits. So it's unlike some other jurisdictions or places where you have to send in your script, send in your project, make an argument for that project to be made. We don't do that. If you, again, meet all the requirements, then therefore the tax credits are paid to the company. There. I think I see a hand go up in the front row.
Can we ask questions as we go?
Oh, yes.
So you mentioned stackable. So how does this stack? So somebody talked about script writing. So it's like 40 plus 35. Like
Great, that's a great question. So the question was, that how are these stackable, these tax credits? Most of them are like I said, as I used that example of filming a project in Langley, you would get the 40% plus the 12.5%. The script writing one is slightly different from all the rest of the stackable ones there. So if you have a BC screenwriter on your project, then the tax credit is 35% of that person's salary. And the reason why it's slightly different is the way the legislation was written was that it initially excluded scriptwriters from the tax credits. They added this in a few years ago so that it captures that, but technically it's not stackable, but you can still access it for an eligible project.
Correct. And we're going to go through an example of how that goes.
Perfect. So before we go to the next question, I just want to quickly ask, this is a map of the Metro Vancouver area there. As I mentioned in the previous slide, there was a regional bonus as well as what we call a distant location bonus. All those two are stackable on that 40%. So if you are filming your project in, say, like I said, somewhere like Langley, Maple Ridge, somewhere like that, then that 12.5 points is in addition to the 40. Now, if you go further out, say to Vancouver Island, or say you go into Kelowna, Prince George, something like that, in addition to that 12.5%, you get another 6%. So that 12.5% jumps up to 18.5% in addition to the 40% that you're doing. So if you're doing something out in a remote area, you'd be accessing 3 tax credits. The basic tax credit of 40, the regional tax credit of 12.5%, and the distant location of 6% on those pieces there. I had a question from Ronald.
Right. If we can ask questions as we go along.
Yep.
Question about the requirement for a broadcaster or distributor for an FIBC. Suppose we go with a digital service directly. So Capco, they don't allow to go direct. We need an intermediary distributor. But does FIBC allow us to engage with a digital service directly?
Sure. So FIBC is the program we're talking about, Film Incentive BC, just so you don't understand the acronym that was used there. And so the question is, like, if you wanted to go to a digital distributor, and I'll just use Apple as an example of a digital distributor. It could be anybody bigger, it could be somebody smaller than that. Does it require a Canadian distribution company, an intermediary, in order to make it qualify? The answer is yes, even under the BC tax credit. So it aligns with the federal program. So the requirement here is that a project has to have a Canadian broadcaster or a Canadian distributor guarantee that the production will be shown in Canada within 24 months of completion. That's why if you use somebody like, if you wanted to have the project go to a streamer like Netflix or a Prime or an Apple Plus, then you would have to have that. Those aren't Canadian companies, even though they are shown. You can get access to them in Canada. They're not considered Canadian companies. So that's why you would have to have that Canadian distributor licensed to them in order to make it work. Okay.
Example of Canadian distributors.
There's big ones like Elevation and Mongrel you could use, but there's some much smaller ones that some production companies have actually their own distribution companies. They have to be registered essentially and set up as distribution companies. But so you can have some very big ones, but you can have some very small ones as well.
Yeah.
Is Crave part of Canadian?
Crave is Canadian, so Crave is part of Bell Media. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Back to your first slide, you mentioned how it's being taken control for FIC. So with international co-productions, that doesn't have to be the case because the Canadian side could be like 30% or so.
So the question is that if it was like what we call a co-production, an international co-production, so a project that is being shared by a company here in BC and a company that's, let's just say, from India, in this example, the ownership of that project can be shared. And it's dictated by what the co-production agreement is between Canada and this very example, India, what that would dictate. So there may be a different agreement between Canada and Japan, for example, or Canada and UK. Those agreements are all different, and that dictates the amount of ownership that the BC company needs to have in that project.
So if the BC company had less than 51%, could they still access FIBC?
If it was under a co-production, yes. Okay, but if it's not, then then they're not a co.
Canadian, yeah.
They're not Canadian.
Now, regarding interprovincial, how does that work? Because I've actually heard that a lot of other provinces, some of them don't need 51%, but BC does, and that's apparently legislative. Now, is that the case where if I was to co-produce with, say, Saskatchewan or Manitoba, that I would have to have 51% ownership?
So, because we've got a few more slides to go through, I will quickly answer the question. The answer to that question is that in an interprovincial co-production, that's a co-production between a BC company and a company from Ontario, for example. That means that yes, the BC company would still need to maintain a 51% ownership of that project. I won't get into the details now, and I just want to make sure that we get through all of our presentation, but I'd be happy to come back to that afterwards. Is that okay?
And I just want to quickly highlight, each province has its own regulatory body. So like BC is FIB, Creative BC, Ontario is Ontario Creates, and they all are they're similar, but there's slight differences of what's eligible and what's not eligible.
Next slide.
Next slide.
So I talked quickly about the regional and the distant location tax credit. Another big bonus is this tax credit we call DAVE, the digital animation and visual effects tax credit. It also includes post-production. So if this tax credit is specifically for those types of activities, again, it is a stackable on top of the 40%. It's also stackable upon the regional and the distant location if the project qualifies for that. So basically, if you're doing any type of post-production work, and I'll let Mandeep explain what post-production is and what it includes, animation or visual effects done in BC, then you're getting another 16 points on top of the 40%. So again, if you have a visual effects artist that's working on your project, then every $100 you pay that person, you would get $40 under the basic program, and then another 16% under the DAVE tax credit.
Yeah, so I won't get in too much, but like post-production is all your editorial, your sound, your picture, all your visual effects. So you're getting, that work is done after all the shooting and film, so you're getting additional labor on top of that 40%.
And this tax credit is a great program, especially if you decide that you're doing a project somewhere else in the world and you don't want to do it in BC. So you want to do something wherever you want to do it, but it's not in BC, but you want to come back and do your post-production or your visual effects here in BC, then you can get this tax credit for that work that's being done in BC.
Yeah, so a lot of US companies, like the big players in the big studios, I won't mention who they are, a lot of their post-production work is done here in BC. And there's a lot of post-production companies, that's the only service they provide.
Exactly. So this here is just a very quick snapshot of what an effective tax credit would look like for a production. In this production, I made a quick change, and I forgot to change the left-hand side of the stage, so don't look at the left-hand side. It's really the right-hand side that you need to look at. This one here is based on $1 million of labor you expect that you would spend on a project. Now, again, this is just an example. This could be $100,000 that you spend in labor there. If under this tax credit program example that we have here, if you access a bunch of the bonuses and the federal program, which I haven't even talked about yet, we could be looking at a net effective tax credit of about $390,000 there. So 39% of your labor expenditures would come back to you from various levels of government. And again, this is a refundable incentive, so you don't have to have taxes owing, you don't have to have profit. Basically, if you don't have any taxes owing, then you would get a check, a payment of $390,000 back from the government to you.
Yeah, so I'm just going to run through an example and highlight a few items. So, as you're starting your creative materials, you want to start thinking about this budget and this calculation at the same time, because you want to, this calculation and this tax credit really is there to help you with financing your project. So at the same time, you want to build a relationship with your banks, and that can be any bank that does any sort of film and TV financing. I'll name a few. One of them is our sponsors, RBC, and the other one is National Bank, who's going to be the sponsor for tonight's festival. But all banks can kind of provide this sort of financing. They all have the film and TV sector. So when Bob is saying that you're going to get this whatever $390,000 as a tax credit, when you do this calculation, there's other processes you have to go through to making sure your estimates are correct or not. You're going to take this back to your bank and say, loan me this much money. They're going to loan you out of that amount maybe 80%, 90%, 95%, depending on your credibility or if it's your first time, and that so that you have money up front to go make your whether it's a feature or a series or a short, whatever it is. So you have the money. And then what they do is that it might be 18 months, it might be 2 years. They know that you're going to get this tax credit back. We're lending you the money, so you're going to use those tax credits to repay that loan. So that's really what it's also there for as part of your financing structure as well.
So again, this tax credit is based on actual expenditures incurred. So you have to incur the expenditure first, and then the government will rebate those amounts back. So basically, you need to cash flow your project, as Mandeep says, and that's why you're taking this estimate to your financier there. And it doesn't have to be a Canadian bank. It can be any other type of financier, but that's generally what they're looking at. But because this is what we call Canadian paper and backed by the government, it's quite solid, and that's why institutions will fund at a fairly high level.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a really great program that the province has and federally that filmmakers can take advantage of. So it'll help you because as an emerging artist, as a new filmmaker, budgeting and cash flow is really your obstacle, right? But then you want to start thinking about this process early on because there's application processes. So you have to submit an application. That may take months because everyone has a backlog.
Exactly.
So you don't want to be waiting. That will delay all your other your steps.
Quick question?
So I want to just get clarification on labor versus non-labor. So we talked about region, like going to Langley and shooting. So does it mean if I just take people there and shoot, I get for the labor more money back, or if I spend on locations there or equipment rentals, I get credits on those?
So the question is like, are the tax credits, if you, especially on the regional and distant location, do they include other non-labor costs? No. The answer is no. It is basically if you go there, then the amounts of labor, not necessarily because of there, but the amount of labor that you pay that's what the tax credit is based on. There's no tax credit on location costs, on renting equipment, things like that, regardless of where you were at.
So think of it's all labor. It's all somebody you're individually paying to perform a service. So it's not something tangible that you're purchasing or renting. It's someone's salary you're paying because someone's paying tax on that. You're creating a job. So think of it from that. Like that. Those are really and there's a list on the Creative BC website and CMF that goes through what's eligible and what's not eligible.
Sorry, let's go to the next slide because I'm just looking at time as well. So this quickly, as Mandy kind of touched upon, about it's sort of the application process. So again, there's a couple things that you want to do. You have to apply to Creative BC for your eligibility certificate. because that triggers a lot of times for your lender a payment of some sort generally, but you do need it in order to make sure that your project qualifies. So that's one of the pieces that you want, and you want to do that soon. You want to do it essentially as soon as you feel that your project is greenlit and you're going forward with it there. Under the FIBC program, it's a two-stage process. So in other words, when you come, you do your eligibility, you make your project, and then you have to come to us for a completion certificate. You have to meet certain criteria. That's where we verify that it's actually complete based on actuals there. The final step, and it's critical, is that you actually have to, after you get your certificates, you don't get payment automatically. You have to still submit those certificates and your corporate income tax return to the tax authority, Canada Revenue Agency, and they will assess the claim and actually pay the claim. So we certify the project and the production company are eligible, then you go to the Canada Revenue Agency to say, we're eligible, please pay us the tax credit.
Yeah. This process may seem overwhelming, so don't feel overwhelmed. You just have to have the right people, and then there's resources there that can guide you. But it's, just have your accounting correct, have your legal look at it, and just follow the steps. So there should be no issues. Yeah. And just start thinking about it early. I really, really recommend that.
Exactly.
Early in advance.
Exactly. And I think planning and preparing is key to all this. Next slide, please. So just quickly, this shows you sort of our process as well internally, what kind of timelines that you're looking at in order to make sure that you apply in a timely manner so that you get your certificates and that you can make your claims back to the Canada Revenue Agency for payment. Because the longer you wait for certificates and payment, the more interest that you're going to pay to your lender. So as we like to say, time is money.
Exactly.
Anything to add?
Nope. The next.
So that was a very quick snapshot. We didn't have a ton of time to do that. We're posting this?
We're going to post this. You can either take a picture of this, but we'll also post a link on the iSAFF website. So if you ever, 3 months down the road, 6 months, whatever, if you have a project, you want to look at the structure, you have a resource to kind of, and then you can also have.
So, and don't hesitate to reach out to us at any point. If you've got questions, you've got general questions, you've got project-specific questions, Mandeep does it. Reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk it through with you. We've got a great team that can help you with it. And we've got great resources on our website. We have FAQs all about almost everything up there, but feel free to contact us. We've got a few minutes for questions.
Yep.
Who wants to go first? Go ahead, Ron.
Sure.
So, general best practice, given the cost to apply to your cost report, any legal, whatever, what do you think would be the minimal amount a budget should be, or a labor expenditure should be, that would make sense to apply for the FIBC?
You want to jump in?
There's no cap, right? So I think that the fees are percent-based, right? A percent base of your budget. So it's not like everyone's getting charged the same amount, and that's why it's a percentage of whatever your production budget is. So that way you're paying that percent.
So just, we've seen claims where the labor expenditure is low as $30,000. We've seen claims where the labor expenditure is $10 million. So it's not, it varies. And so if, for a small production, the tax incentive is actually quite important, and it has a big impact on your financing. So a tax credit against $30,000 worth of labor still can be substantial. I know I wouldn't want to leave it on the table because it doesn't cost anything right? Yes.
Okay, my mind is kind of blown. I mean, this has always been here, and I'm just curious, do people leave this on the table? Do a lot of people just leave it?
I think that's why we're having this session, because people just find it so overwhelming, and there's so many requirements because there's a BC portion, there's a federal portion, and they're like, it's too overwhelming, and they're just like, I don't, because a lot of it's like the filmmakers, they have that creative mindset, so they don't have this mindset of this process, so they don't look at this and it just gets left on the table. All of the major production companies here that have been around for many, many years, they're all taking advantage of this tax credit program, right? So there's emerging a lot that.
Exactly, and I think that's the reason why we're doing this, is that so that
emerging and new filmmakers that may not be familiar with it, take advantage of it. It is free money, essentially.
Yeah.
It takes some effort, and the first one will be somewhat overwhelming.
There's also
but
growing pains, and
exactly.
then you'll...
But like anything, it's like riding a bike. As soon as you learn how to ride a bike, you go, how come I didn't do this earlier? I saw a question in the back.
Yeah, thanks for this. I'm from Quebec, and so the reason I'm here is because it's always great to learn from what other people are doing and see how it can be pulled out, how it can be digested. I'm early. I just submitted my first tax credits for a short in Quebec, and so that's where I'm
Congrats.
at. Thank you. And it's like terrifying, but once you're set up, theoretically the next one will be easier, right? So it's like you gotta go through the pain and then you learn. It becomes easy. The thing that's on my mind as someone starting a production company now, relative to, from what I understand, when tax credits were created 30 years ago to help reward companies for creating jobs by then getting it and then cash flowing pre-development, at least in Quebec, the challenge now is that they're built into the financing structure and we're expected to take on the risk through an interim loan, which are at exorbitant interest rates. And so, fortunately, like on this short, I didn't include them and they're giving them to me and I'll be able to use them in the way that they were intended. But I'm kind of scared as I now hopefully get into bigger projects that I may not be allowed to use them the way I am, which is based on intention, but not necessarily how it's been kind of bastardized, so to speak. So it's like here in BC, if I were to do an international co-production, like optimistically, like can the tax credits still potentially be used in that way, where with a production partner, we could not include them in the financing, especially if we don't have a distributor or broadcaster to trigger them? Could we basically still make a movie and then hope that we get the tax credits later if things go well? Or will we be declined if they're not in the
I'm taking in between.
I think so one of the, if I may, is that you have to have a Canadian distributor attached to it, or a broadcaster, or a distributor attached to it, so that is part of the eligibility requirements. So that's why then you're not using the tax credits part of your financing structure. So that's probably why it was not allowed. But you have to, here in BC, that's one of the requirements. You do have to have.
But also, it really is a deal between you and your financing partners. So you're right, when they first were created the tax credits, was the hope that the companies would be able to use it as capitalization. But in reality, when your distributors, your broadcasters found out about tax credits, they used it as part of the financing deal. So it really is dependent upon your agreement, your partnerships, if you can keep the tax credits out, but there's nothing within legislation that requires you to keep it in or out.
Okay, yeah, just to clarify, the reason I was able to was because after making the movie, we got a distributor, which allowed us then to trigger the tax credits, but at a bigger scale, where the orgs will likely, like basically in Quebec, they'd say, we want to see the tax credits in the budget, whether or not you have a distributor or not, and that's very dangerous to me, and I'm worried about it. So I'm wondering if in BC, does Creative BC hold it against filmmakers if tax credits aren't included?
No.
In the application?
No, again, it is really, we leave it up. That's a relationship between you and your partners. And Creative BC does not
They'll
dictate.
say, make the movie, we'd
So
love to give you tax credits.
they call them they call it excess tax credits. So really, all those tax credits that you're talking about, that really goes back to the producer to kind of reinvest into new development, labor within the producer's company, or a new project.
And you can use it to
Capitalize.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jargon.
Exactly. We're a little over time. Are we okay?
Okay. We have 5 minutes to wrap.
Okay, so I saw another question here.
Yeah, just to follow to that. So I just recently wrapped a shot, invested some money into it, decent amount. Now, after the fact, I think I can claim some tax credits as well as same. I just need to find a distributor. What's the time frame attached? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? How long after?
So I'll answer the time frame question, and then maybe Mandeep, you can talk about trying to find a distributor or a broadcaster on that. So the time frame that you have to do all this is quite tight. So you've made the project already, it's completed, so you have 24 months from the date of completion to get that Canadian distributor or Canadian broadcaster attached to the project. You also only have 18 months from the end of your corporate tax year to actually claim the tax credits with the Canada Revenue Agency. So there's two timelines there, 18 months and 24 months that you need to kind of consider there. That's if you can get all those pieces in place. So those are the things that some of the timelines that you need to stay aware of in order to make so that the tax credits don't fall off the table. Mandy, do you want to jump in?
For the broadcaster, I know it's challenging, right? It's like for shorts to get on a platform with a broadcaster or even a streamer or a distributor, but it's really in the hands of the producer to go pitch and yeah.
And I've got so this is a short that you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's something that we allow for productions, Canadian productions, is that if they are shown in a Canadian film festival, we consider it has met the criteria of having it shown in Canada within 24 months. So if iSAFF showed your project within that 24-month period, we would consider it having exhibited in Canada.
Because it's been showcased.
Exactly. Yes, you don't need to have a distributor. You can go. Yeah. So if Vancouver International Film Festival, iSAFF, Whistler showed it, York Film Festival, we would consider it.
Outside BC is fine for BC.
Yes, it's in Canada. In
Canada.
Sorry, can I just make sure I understand, because that's amazing.
Now we're going to get 800 submissions next year.
Time's up.
Okay.
So you screen at a recognized film festival, and that will allow you to trigger the tax credits for screening at a recognized festival.
In Canada, a recognized Canadian film festival, let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I saw
I think we have
a
to wrap
time's up,
Yeah.
but I'm going to be around. I'll take questions for a few minutes. Feel free to come and see me. Thank you very much, iSAFF, for inviting me. Thank you, Mandeep.
Thank you for having us, coming here, Bob, and thank you, everyone.